The envelope wasn't postmarked. It had been hand-delivered. I found it tucked beneath the windshield wiper of my Subaru, just as the late March wind picked up enough grit to sting my eyes. No return address. Just my name on the front in cursive I recognized instantly. Tight, slanted, deliberate. My mother's handwriting. I peeled it open, standing right there in the hospital parking lot, the world spinning behind me. Patients wheeled in, nurses lighting cigarettes, a kid crying softly into someone's coat. I wasn't ready for what I saw inside. Not even a full sheet. Just a single half-folded page, lined, torn from a legal pad. Veronica, please don't try coming to the lake house this year. It's not your place anymore. Marion Hayes. She signed it like a business memo. Full name, no mom, no warmth. A command, not a conversation. The wind nearly took it from my fingers. I held tight. At first, I didn't react. I just stood there, breathing in diesel fumes and disbelief, reading it again and again like the words might rearrange themselves into something softer. They didn't. Don't try coming. It wasn't even the cruelty of it that hit me first. It was the efficiency. 7 sentences would have been mercy. An excuse, a lie about limited space or changing traditions. But this was precision, intent. A clean erasure, done with a single sentence. I folded the letter slowly, the crease sharp, slid it into my coat pocket without flinching, because I wasn't the girl she remembered. Not anymore. She must have thought I'd crumble, that I'd call, that I'd beg, maybe ask what I'd done, try to undo it. But that part of me dried up years ago. Around the same time, I stopped waiting for her to notice when I succeeded. I slipped into my car, started the engine, sat there for a long moment, listening to the low hum of the heater fan and the beat of my own pulse in my neck. Then I smiled, just faintly, because what she didn't know, what none of them knew, was that their little vineyard still lived on my credit. And some debts don't disappear just because you pretend someone's no longer family. Some debts come due, and I'd just received the final confirmation I needed to collect. I didn't tell anyone about the letter, not that day, not the next. It stayed in the inner pocket of my wool coat, folded so precisely it felt more like a document than a message, something to be reviewed, filed, maybe notarized. That's how cold it was. The phrase repeated itself in my head as I walked through the week, echoing in places it didn't belong. It's not your place anymore. I heard it while reviewing blueprints for the stormwater tunnel project downtown, while answering polite questions from city officials in tailored suits who'd never seen mud under their fingernails. I heard it on the treadmill at 6 a.m., feet pounding against the belt like I was trying to outrun it. I even heard it while brushing my teeth. The way she'd written it, like a foregone conclusion, not a decision, final, surgical. I knew what it meant, even if she didn't spell it out. It meant I didn't belong. It meant I was no longer considered part of the family unit, not where it counted, not at the lake house, not at the reunion, not when the others, Bridget with her perfect sons, and Jonathan with his half-baked wine labels, would be posing for porch photos with flag cakes and fireworks in the background. They wouldn't say anything. They'd just let it be known. Veronica's not here this year, and nobody would ask why, because I had always made it easy not to ask. The funny thing is, I hadn't even decided if I wanted to go. The invitation was assumed, never spoken. The reunion was a tradition that moved with the seasons, not with affection. You showed up because it was expected. You brought wine and a side dish. You smiled politely. You disappeared afterward, unchanged. But this letter, This denial of place, it shifted something. I'd spent so many years carving out a life that didn't need their approval. Moving to Denver, rising through the ranks in a field dominated by men who spoke over me until I made it impossible, buying my own apartment, becoming the kind of woman who could walk into a city hall hearing and command the room with 3 words and a laser pointer. I never needed their invitation, but they had needed me. Years ago, when the family vineyard was expanding, before the new tasting room, before the branding consultant, before the solar panels, Jonathan called in a panic. Their loan application was weak. They needed collateral, clean credit, stability. I didn't hesitate. I co-signed, used my spotless financial record like scaffolding to prop up their dream. No one ever said thank you, just assumed I'd do what the eldest daughter always did. Bear the weight, then vanish from the photograph. I pulled up my banking app that night and searched the old loan agreement. There it was. Still active. Still tied to my name. Still mine to dismantle. And if I was no longer family, then I no longer owed them protection. In Denver, they call it grit. A kind of quiet resilience that doesn't scream or swell. It settles, hardens, builds. I didn't realize how much of it I'd gathered until I left home for good. The week after the letter, I stood at the construction site, boots planted in wet earth, watching as steel pilings sank into the ground. The wind of the Platte River cut through my jacket, but I didn't flinch. I'd spent the last decade working on projects that would outlast most people's memories. Bridges, overpasses, water control systems, foundations for things meant to endure. And not once in those 10 years had my mother visited. She knew where I was. I sent postcards at first, updates, even tickets to the ribbon cutting when we completed the South Loop Transit Hub. Nothing dramatic, just olive branches disguised as professionalism. She never responded. Not with a call, not even with a curt thank you. Eventually, I stopped reaching out. Not out of bitterness, but self-preservation. There's only so many times you can offer pieces of yourself before you start running out. But that didn't mean I stopped building. Out here, among cement mixers and survey flags, I wasn't the girl who got left out of family photos. I wasn't the second choice, the afterthought, the one who always came second to convenience. I was the one in charge. The one whose signature approved change orders, the one who caught structural faults others missed. I was the reason deadlines were met, budgets were held, cities kept functioning. And if my mother never saw that, it wasn't because it wasn't visible. It was because she chose not to look. The team broke early for lunch. I stayed behind, clipboard in hand, double-checking specs while the noise died down around me. The site emptied slowly, the hum of machinery replaced by silence. That's when I made the call. Not to her, to my attorney. I'd been working with Marta ever since I bought my first condo. She was sharp, methodical, and never once made me feel like I had to soften my language to be heard. I explained the loan situation, my co-signer status, the vineyard's current liabilities, the fact that the primary borrower had defaulted on 3 payments last year without informing me. She asked only one question. Are you ready to detach? I answered with 3 words. File the papers. Because the truth is, foundations don't always need reinforcement. Sometimes they need demolition. And I was done holding up something that would never stand on its own. Let them find out the way they always had. Too late. Too proud to ask. I didn't owe them warning. I owed myself the break. It started, like most things in my family, with an emergency disguised as a favor. Jonathan had called late, almost midnight, his voice too cheerful to mask the edge of panic beneath it. Hey, big sis. Quick question. Hypothetical, kind of. That was his way. Float something impossible. Make it sound optional. He said they were expanding the vineyard, that this was the moment. Investors lined up, new distributor contracts pending. All they needed was one last financial push to get over the edge. I was living in a modest apartment then, still working 12-hour days, no weekends off. My credit was pristine. I didn't drink wine, didn't much care for the vineyard or the aesthetic they were chasing. But it was family. And when Jonathan said, "We just need a cosigner to lock the rate," I didn't hesitate. He promised it was temporary. 6 months, tops. We'll refinance. You'll never even see a statement. They didn't refinance, and I saw every statement. The loan was substantial. Enough to expand the tasting room, build out a wedding pavilion, and redesign the label with some up-and-coming designer Bridget knew from grad school. I didn't attend the launch party. I wasn't invited. But the debt followed me. Every quarter, I received copies of the payment reports, quiet little reminders that I was tethered to something I had no hand in managing. If they defaulted, it was my name the bank would come after, my assets, my credit. I kept quiet, always had. That was my role in the family economy, reliable when needed, invisible when not. But standing in my kitchen, staring at the scanned copy of the loan document, I saw it differently now. This wasn't generosity. It was leverage. They had used my stability like scaffolding, then yanked the ladder once they were high enough not to see me. I pulled out the old file folder, labeled Hayes Vineyard Liability Agreement, and reviewed every page. My signature was there, clean and clear, dated, notarized. I remember the day I signed it, the smell of printer toner, the way Jonathan had smiled, clapping me on the shoulder like I'd just done something heroic. They never paid a single consulting fee, never offered a stake, not even a bottle with my name etched into the label. And now they wanted me gone, stripped of belonging, but still expected to carry the weight, like a mule released from the barn but still yoked to the cart. I closed the folder, made another call to Marta. I want to start the process for formal disassociation. I want it out of my name. She didn't ask why. She just said, "Understood. I'll send the paperwork tonight." And in that moment, I realized something chillingly simple. They hadn't excluded me from the family. They'd just forgotten that I was still holding part of it together. The paperwork arrived by 9 a.m. sharp. Marta didn't waste time. 3 PDFs in my inbox, clean, crisp, labeled down to the signature line. A formal withdrawal of co-liability, a notarized statement of non-involvement, and an affidavit confirming I'd received no financial benefit from the vineyard's expansion. I reviewed them over my second cup of coffee, each paragraph another unspooling thread. Unhooking yourself from something you once agreed to hold, no matter how foolishly, requires precision. Banks don't care about family dynamics. They care about risk. I had to prove my detachment wasn't impulsive, that it was necessary, justified, and airtight. The legal language was dry, impersonal. Still, I read every line twice. When I signed, it wasn't with hesitation. It was with clarity. Black ink on white paper. A boundary drawn in legal terms. Enforceable and irrevocable. I printed the documents. Stared at the pages as they emerged from the tray, their warmth fading as they cooled in my hands. There was no satisfaction yet, just the steady beat of something beginning to close. I scanned them back into the system, uploaded them through the secure portal, and clicked Confirm Submission. A quiet ping told me it was done. No calls, no warnings, no ceremonial announcement. I didn't tell Jonathan. I didn't forward the email to my mother. I didn't make a scene in a family group chat that I hadn't contributed to in over a year. I simply acted. They would find out soon enough. When the bank reevaluated their repayment terms, when the credit conditions changed, when the financial cushions they never noticed start to disappear. That was the thing they never understood. I wasn't the noisy one. I didn't explode. I didn't throw wine glasses or write long-winded texts at 2 a.m. begging to be seen. I moved in silence. And silence, when paired with strategy, becomes sharp, clean, surgical. I took the rest of the day off. Not because I needed rest, but because I needed stillness. I went to the botanical gardens, walked beneath the quiet arms of sycamores, let my mind adjust to the unfamiliar absence of weight. The thought came to me between 2 rows of blooming peonies. They had disowned me with a single sentence. I had returned the gesture with a signature. One removed me from a reunion. The other removed their safety net. They'd built a house on borrowed credit, never wondering what might happen if the foundation walked away. And I had just unpinned my name from their ledger. No phone call, no fight, just detachment, formalized and final. And that, I knew, would land louder than anything I could ever say. There's a photo in my mother's hallway I haven't seen in years. 4th of July, 12 summers ago. The whole family arranged on the lake house porch, arms looped, smiles too wide, sun flaring in from the side. Everyone wore red, white, or blue, except me. I'd shown up in charcoal gray. It was the only clean shirt I had after the drive. I remember standing at the edge of the group, shoulder tilted just outside the frame. You can still see me if you look closely. Half a face, the curve of one cheek, part of a sleeve. They never cropped me out. They just didn't center me to begin with. That's how it always was. Present, but peripheral. Included in the logistics, excluded from the story, the one asked to bring extra chairs, but not asked to sit. The one told to take the photo, then reminded to stay out of it. Even when I was little, the difference was subtle but unmistakable. My siblings got nicknames: Bridgie, Johnny Boy. I stayed Veronica. Proper. Fixed. If I spoke up, I was dramatic. If I stayed quiet, I was cold. My mother had this way of looking through me during arguments, like she was scanning for something more worth engaging. I once spent an entire Thanksgiving washing dishes in the kitchen while the rest played board games. No one offered to help. No one noticed when I slipped outside to walk alone in the dark. They didn't mean to forget me. Not deliberately, but forgetting became tradition. When I left for college, I didn't get a care package like the others. No late-night calls asking if I was okay. When I got my first promotion, I sent a group text. Not one reply. I stopped sending updates after that. It wasn't a break, it was a slow bleed. And yet, I kept showing up. Birthdays, holidays, the occasional emergency. Every time I told myself maybe this year would be different. Maybe they'd ask about my work. Maybe someone would say they were proud. Instead, I became the one they assumed would adjust, would shift her plans, would drive the extra miles, would co-sign the loan and keep quiet about it afterward. I was dependable in the way furniture is, useful, present, taken for granted. The lake house was always the worst of it. The setting didn't help. Too many shadows cast by porch lights. Too many silences disguised as tradition. That's where the letter had aimed. Not just to exclude me from a holiday, but to rewrite history. As if I'd never been part of it. As if I was always just outside the frame. And the truth is, I was. But now, for the first time, I wasn't trying to step back in. I was planning something else. Something they wouldn't see coming. because I'd learned, after years of watching from the margins, exactly where the pressure points were, and I was done being quiet. After the letter, nothing came. No follow-up, no clarification, no awkward text to soften the edge. Just silence, thick and intentional. The days stretched long. At work, I answered emails, led site reviews, approved permits. At night, I cooked for one, drank tea by the window, folded the same sweater twice. Routine kept the silence from creeping in too close. But it was still there. Not the silence of misunderstanding, but the kind that follows a decision already made. The kind that dares you to react. I kept waiting for someone to break ranks. Bridget had always been the buffer. Sweet, over-apologetic, fond of neutral texts about family harmony. I half expected her to call, voice low and awkward, with some watered-down version of Mom's message. Something like, "She's just stressed, you know how she gets." But Bridget said nothing. Neither did Jonathan, though he'd always been the one who called when he needed something. Not a word. Not even a joke about missing my potato salad or how I was probably better off avoiding the drama this year. I waited 7 days. On the 8th, I booked the cabin. Not at the lake house, of course. On the other side of the water, just far enough that I wouldn't be seen unless someone was looking, and just close enough that they'd notice when they did. It was a private rental, high elevation, modern but discreet. Wrap-around deck, 2 fireplaces, room for 10. The kind of place you book when you want to be alone, or very deliberately not alone. I invited friends I hadn't seen in too long. College roommates, former co-workers, a couple from my climbing gym who'd been through their own estrangements. No explanations, just a group message with dates and a photo of the lake. The responses came fast. Count me in, just booked my flight, what should I bring? There was no blood in that group, no shared maiden names or old family recipes, but there was belonging, and I realized that was enough, more than enough. I started assembling a different kind of reunion, one without roles to perform or traditions to tiptoe around. One where I didn't have to mute myself to be welcome. As the RSVP stacked up, I imagined the lake house across the water. I could see it in my mind. Same faded shutters, same squeaky porch swing, same forced smiles stretched over cheap fireworks and burnt burgers. And this year, for the first time, I wouldn't be part of the backdrop. I wouldn't be waiting for someone to see me. I'd be across the lake, surrounded by people who already did. And when the time came, they wouldn't need to wonder if I was coming. I'd already arrived. Just not in the way they expected. The cabin stood on a ridge above the water, all clean lines and glass walls, as if it had nothing to hide. From the deck, I could see the far side of the lake, the small white dock, the flagpole, the sloped roof of the family lake house. Familiar. Shrinking with distance. I arrived 3 days early. Brought groceries, linens, fresh flowers for the table. Not for show, just because I wanted the space to feel lived in before the others arrived. I unpacked slowly, lined up mugs in the cabinet, set logs by the fireplace, folded extra towels. There was a stillness to the place that felt earned. No creaky floors, no ghosts lingering in the woodwork. The first guest pulled in around dusk on Friday. Casey and Lee, old friends from my first job out of college, now married, full of loud laughs and soft reassurances. We hugged on the porch like no time had passed. "You look good," Casey said, eyeing me. "Rested?" I smiled at that. Rested wasn't a word I'd heard in years. By Saturday afternoon, the rest had arrived. Luggage piled near the entryway, someone opened wine, and music started playing from a small speaker tucked near the kitchen island. It wasn't chaotic. It was warm. Laughter spilled out in low waves. The house adjusted to the people inside it like it had been waiting. We didn't talk about the letter. I hadn't told them. Not directly. But they knew something had shifted. They sensed it in the way I moved through the space, measured, unhurried. Not waiting for approval, not asking for permission. We played card games, cooked too much food, sat under blankets on the porch long after the sun dropped behind the trees. Someone told a story about an ex who ghosted after 4 years. Someone else confessed they'd left their family's Thanksgiving dinner halfway through and driven 2 states without stopping. And when the subject of family came up, no one looked away. There was no performance in that cabin, no old roles to snap back into, just presence, chosen company. On Sunday morning, I stood at the edge of the deck with my coffee and watched the lake house across the water. It was early, quiet. A few cars in the driveway, no movement on the dock. From here, it looked like a postcard, scenic, polished. But I knew the inside. I knew the silence that lived in those rooms, the sideways glances, the forced conversations, the carefully folded rejection that came in the shape of a letter and a signature. I sipped my coffee, then turned away from the view. Behind me, someone was making pancakes. Someone else was setting out mugs. I didn't need the lake house anymore. I had built something better. And this time, I was fully in the frame. It happened just after noon on the 4th. The sun had climbed high, reflecting off the water in sharp glints. I stood on the dock behind the cabin, sandals in hand, the planks warm beneath my feet. The lake was still, the kind of still that holds its breath. Across the water, the family lake house began to stir. First came movement on the porch. Folding chairs arranged in their usual half circle. A cooler dragged out. Children's voices faint and high-pitched, spilling into the air. Then came the figures I knew by shape more than detail. My sister's husband with his baseball cap, Jonathan in his ever-present vineyard hoodie, my mother in her sun hat, motioning toward the grill. It was like watching a rehearsal. Same lines, same blocking, the annual performance of unity. I stepped into the rowboat, untied the rope, and let the lake pull me. I didn't row fast, just steady, controlled movements, the oars slicing clean paths in the water. I wasn't heading toward them, not directly. My course would take me past the lake house at a polite distance, close enough to be seen, but too far for voices to carry. Halfway across, I felt it. Eyes on me. I didn't turn my head, didn't wave, just kept rowing. But in my periphery, I caught the subtle shift. A body frozen mid-step. Someone adjusting their sunglasses. My mother, maybe, standing still at the railing, her hand hovering over the armrest of a chair. They hadn't expected me. That was clear. To them, I was supposed to vanish quietly. Absorb the letter like shame. Let it settle in my gut, heavy and final. That was the old pattern. Silence mistaken for compliance. But I wasn't here to confront. I was here to exist. And existence, when denied, becomes a form of defiance. I rowed past without breaking pace. The boat moved smooth as breath. From the shore, I imagined them whispering, "Was that Veronica? Is she staying here? Did she bring people?" I didn't answer. I wasn't there to be questioned. When I reached the opposite dock, Casey was waiting. He helped tie the rope, passed me a towel for the sweat on my brow. "They see you?" he asked. I nodded once. They saw. We walked back to the cabin in silence. the kind that holds no tension, just understanding. Later that afternoon, as fireworks began to pop faintly in the distance, I sat on the deck with a glass of sparkling water and watched the sky. Behind me, laughter floated from the kitchen. Across the lake, the porch lights flickered on. Two worlds, one shrinking, one expanding. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't trying to bridge them. I was building my own shore. The call came on Monday morning. I was slicing fruit in the kitchen, sunlight streaming through the wide windows, the sound of someone playing Nina Simone low in the background. My phone buzzed on the counter, and I saw the number before I picked it up. Area code from back home. Unknown, but not unfamiliar. I answered without hesitation. "Miss Hayes," the voice said, polite but clipped. "This is Natalie from First AgriBank. I'm calling regarding the co-signature on the Hayes Vineyard expansion loan." There was a pause, slight but intentional. I let her fill it. "Due to your formal withdrawal from the agreement, the loan has triggered a default clause in the terms of the contract. The primary account holders will be notified today. We wanted to confirm that this action was authorized and understood." It was. "Understood," I said calmly. "Confirmed." Another pause. "Thank you. The bank will follow up if there are further developments." She hung up first. I set the phone down beside the bowl of peaches. That was the moment. The trigger. The action I had taken quietly had reached the surface, and now the ripple would spread. On the other side of the lake, somewhere in that old house with its creaky shutters and peeling deck chairs, Jonathan would get the call. Maybe he'd still be nursing a hangover from cheap wine and overcooked ribs. Maybe Mom would be sitting with her second coffee, surveying her kingdom of denial. But the kingdom had just been taxed. When you build your empire on borrowed scaffolding, you learn quickly what happens when support is pulled. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't smile. I simply covered the fruit with a dish towel and walked onto the porch. The others were still waking up slowly, stretching, sipping coffee, greeting the morning like it belonged to them. Casey was reading on the steps. Lee was setting up breakfast on the long table. Everything here moved gently, deliberately, as it should. The lake was glass again, calm and wide. But I could feel the shift in the air. The tension had finally changed sides. They would call. That much I knew. The silence wouldn't last forever, not when money was involved, not when risk touched something real. And when the calls came, I wouldn't answer, because they hadn't written when it was personal. Only now, with consequences looming, would they try to speak. But I had already spoken. Through paperwork, through removal, through a single, irreversible action. And the echo of that action would speak louder than any apology ever could. The first call came just after noon. Jonathan. I let it ring out. No voicemail, just silence on the other end, as if the very act of calling was meant to reel me in, to reset the clock to before. Back when I was still the one who picked up on the second ring, no matter how inconvenient. Back when they knew I would answer because I was afraid not to. I wasn't anymore. The second call came an hour later, Bridget this time, her name flashing on the screen like a memory. I could almost hear the nervous tone she'd use, how she'd stretch her words with concern, but never say the truth outright. I didn't touch the phone. By the end of the day, I had 3 missed calls and 2 voicemails, both blank, as if they started to speak and couldn't find the words. I took screenshots of each one. No reason, just instinct. I'd learned to document things when the stakes were quiet and rising. The next morning, the messages started, from Jonathan. "Hey, we need to talk. Can you call me when you get a chance?" From Bridget. "Did you do something with the loan? Mom's really upset. Please reach out." I read them without reaction, saved them all, because that's the thing about consequences. They feel sudden only to those who weren't paying attention. None of them asked why, none of them offered an apology. They just wanted things fixed, repaired, undone. As if I hadn't sat with that letter in my coat pocket for a week. As if I hadn't read and reread it until the ink began to fade. As if my decision hadn't been built with the same precision I gave every other structure I'd ever touched. On Tuesday, my mother finally broke her silence. A text. 4 words. We should discuss this. Not, I'm sorry. Not, we were wrong. Just a command disguised as a conversation. I didn't respond. Later that night, I stood on the dock with a glass of water and watched their porch across the lake. The lights were on. People moved back and forth behind the curtains. I wondered what the mood was like now. If they were whispering. If they were blaming. If they were starting to realize that some boundaries don't come with warnings. Behind me, laughter drifted from the cabin. A board game. Someone cracking a joke. Music playing softly from a phone. I was surrounded by people who didn't want anything from me but my presence. And across the water were the ones who had taken for granted the one thing they no longer had, my willingness to carry their weight. They were trying now, calling, texting, reaching, but they were already late. And all they were finding was the cold truth of my silence. Bridget tried again the next morning. This time, she left a voicemail. Her voice was small, the kind of tone she used when trying not to upset anyone. Soft edges, upward lilt, like she was afraid of stepping on something fragile. Hey, Veronica. I don't know if you're getting these. I think this has gotten a little out of hand. Mom's really stressed. Jonathan's scrambling with the bank. I don't know what happened exactly, but maybe we can talk. Just let me know. I played it twice, then deleted it. There was no anger in her message. No confrontation, just the usual plea for peace, layered over a quiet request for reversal. But peace had been a one-way arrangement for years. I kept it. They disrupted it. I maintained. They withdrew. I gave. They expected. I heard no accountability, only the assumption that I would, once again, smooth it all over. Jonathan's messages came in less measured. First, we need to fix this. I can't have the loan flagged right now. It affects everything. Then, this is hurting more people than just Mom. That one made me pause. More people than just Mom. As if her pain was assumed, as if mine had never existed. They were scrambling now, each message more urgent than the last. But none of them offered the one thing that might have mattered. Recognition. Not of the loan, not of the letter, not of the years I had been quietly holding up their world while they pretended I wasn't even in the room. They needed my signature when it served them. Now, without it, they were watching the structure shift. I didn't gloat. That wasn't my language. I documented. I watched. I remembered. Because this wasn't about revenge. This was about accuracy, about refusing to be the family's emergency brake, engaged only when things were veering off course, blamed for the whiplash when they finally stopped. I walked down to the lake that afternoon with my journal and sat beneath a pine that bent low over the water. The wind was soft. A boat passed in the distance, its motor faint and steady. I wrote down their messages, word for word. Not to trap them, but to remind myself of the pattern. Even now, in their discomfort, they were reaching out not to repair, but to resume. And I wouldn't be resuming anything. Bridget had always meant well. Jonathan had always meant only himself. And my mother, she meant the silence. But I meant this, the withdrawal, the pause, the refusal to answer when the call was too late and the terms were no longer mine to accept. Let them sit in the stillness I once lived in. Let them feel the cost of erasure, because now the silence belonged to them. It came on a Thursday evening, just after the sun dipped low enough to cast long golden streaks across the water. A call. No voicemail this time. Then a second, then a text. From her. Veronica, we need to talk. No punctuation. No greeting. Just those 5 words. Stiff and unfamiliar. Like someone trying to sound neutral but forgetting how tone works. I read it once, locked my phone and set it face down. For hours, nothing followed. No clarification, no apology, just that message, floating alone in the dark like a flare sent too late. It was her first direct contact since the letter. Weeks of silence broken not by acknowledgement, but by necessity. Because now, it was real. The bank had called. The loan had changed. The safety net had been cut. And I had done it quietly, legally, irrevocably. I made tea, sat on the porch, and watched the lake. Their house across the water was dark now. Porch lights off. No laughter. No movement. The stillness there looked heavier than usual. Not restful. Just empty. The text wasn't really about me. It never had been. It was about the vineyard, the loan, the consequences. We need to talk. Not, I'm sorry. Not, I was wrong. Just a summons, as if I still operated under her command. As if years of dismissal could be resolved with a line typed in haste. She never had been good at repair. She built her authority on assumption. On the idea that being the mother meant she didn't have to explain herself. When we were younger, her silence was a verdict. You knew you'd done something wrong, not because she corrected you, but because she went cold. And then eventually, she'd thaw. Not with words, but with gestures. A plate of food left on the table. A ride offered, not requested. Forgiveness in the form of pretend amnesia. It worked then. But I wasn't that girl anymore. I was a woman who had spent her adult life mastering load calculations, bearing weights others didn't understand. I knew the difference between stress that could be managed and structures that had already failed. This wasn't repairable. This was the result of years of imbalance finally being measured. I didn't reply. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was intentional. It was structure. It was mine. Somewhere across the lake, I imagined her standing in the kitchen, phone in hand, waiting for the dots to appear beneath the message. Waiting for the response that had always come. But this time, there were no dots. No reply, just stillness. And the quiet realization that she wasn't calling a daughter anymore. She was calling someone she had written out. And I had accepted the edit. I didn't write back. Not then. Not ever. Her message sat unread for hours before I locked my phone again and placed it on the kitchen counter. The screen's glow faded, leaving the room dark except for the soft hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of the settling house. The silence was deliberate. It was a statement louder than words could be. Because sometimes the strongest reply is no reply at all. I didn't want to argue. Didn't want to explain. Didn't want to reopen wounds that had been sealed with cold ink and legal signatures. There was a strange power in refusal, a calm that said, "This ends here." I sent the message to Marta that night. Simple. No emotion, no explanation. Just, please begin documenting all correspondence. This is now a legal matter. She responded immediately, professional and steady. Understood. I'll prepare a full record for potential proceedings. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling. Years of carrying unspoken burdens felt lighter somehow. Not gone, but redistributed, returned. I realized that silence wasn't absence, it was protection. The next morning, I went through the calls and messages again, this time organizing them into folders. I printed everything. Bank statements, the letter from my mother, text messages, emails, the withdrawal papers. Each document was a brick in a wall I was building around myself. I wasn't angry, I wasn't bitter, I was precise, clear, unyielding. The kind of strength that doesn't roar, but stands firm. Later that day, a message popped up on my phone from a number I didn't recognize. A text from the bank's legal department. They'd received all the documentation. The case was active. I breathed in slowly. This was no longer personal. It was procedural. And that was a relief. Because when the noise settles, what remains is truth. And truth doesn't need an apology. It only needs acknowledgement. I poured a glass of water, walked to the balcony, and looked out over the city skyline. The wind was light. The world kept turning. I felt steady. Because sometimes the quietest victories are the ones fought in paperwork and patience. Not with anger, but with resolve. Not with spectacle, but with certainty. I had made my choice, and I was standing on the other side of it. The morning air was crisp, the kind that sharpens your senses and clears the fog from your mind. I stepped outside just as the sun began to paint the sky in soft oranges and pale blues. The lake stretched out before me, calm, vast, unchanging. Its surface mirrored the sky, smooth as glass. I carried my coffee to the edge of the dock and sat down, letting my feet dangle just above the water. The wood was cool beneath my palms, steady and reliable. I watched as a single duck glided silently past, leaving ripples that faded quickly into stillness. Behind me, the cabin was waking up, voices drifting from the kitchen, the clink of dishes, the warmth of life unfolding without drama. Across the water, the family lake houses sat quiet, shadowed beneath towering pines. Its windows caught the early light, glowing faintly like distant stars. I could imagine the familiar sounds, the clatter of plates, the laughter, the old stories retold with tired enthusiasm. But those were noises from a world I had stepped away from. I didn't hate them. Not anymore. I felt something quieter. Acceptance. A sense that the ties that bound me had frayed beyond repair, but new ones were being woven, not from blood, but from choice. I thought back to all the years I had tried to fit in, to earn their approval, to be the daughter who mattered. I remembered the silences, the sideways looks, the weight of being invisible in plain sight. And now, here I was, on my own shore. I took a slow sip of coffee, the warmth spreading through me like a promise. The lake didn't care about family drama. It only responded to what touched it: wind, rain, sun. It accepted everything and moved on. That morning, I realized I was the same. The boat tied nearby bobbed gently in the water, waiting. I stood and untied it, sliding in with deliberate calm. The oars rested in their locks, cold but familiar. I pushed off and began to row, each stroke steady, measured. The rhythm settled in my muscles, syncing with my breath. The farther I moved from the shore, the wider the world became. I wasn't escaping. I was arriving. Passing the familiar dock, I looked back once. The family house shrinking, a speck against the trees. No anger, no regret. Just a quiet understanding. I was no longer trying to belong to something that had never truly held me. Instead, I was building my own. And that morning, on the water, with the sun warming my back and the lake stretching endlessly ahead, I felt the weight lift, the ties undone, the future unmoored. And finally, free. The email arrived just after noon on a Tuesday. The subject line was clinical. No flair, no flourish. Fraud case status update. I stared at the screen, the words blurring slightly as the weight of the moment settled over me. The bank had completed its investigation. My claim had been substantiated. The withdrawals were deemed unauthorized under the terms of the loan. Marcus's access was permanently revoked. Reading those words felt strange, not triumphant, not victorious, just final. I had what I needed, the cold, hard confirmation that the truth was on my side. The email detailed next steps: legal options, restitution, contact information for law enforcement if I chose to pursue charges. I scrolled slowly, absorbing the sterile language. I didn't forward the message to anyone. There was no need. The system had spoken. The record was clear. I printed the email, punched holes in the paper, and slid it into the last slot of the folder on my desk. That folder, the one filled with transaction logs, texts, and reports, had become more than evidence. It was a ledger of my quiet resolve, a testament to the power of patience and precision. I closed the folder gently and leaned back in my chair. Outside, the city moved on. Cars hummed past, people bustled along sidewalks, and the sky shifted from pale gray to soft blue. Inside, I felt a stillness that was almost sacred. The fight was over, not with noise or fury, but with facts. I thought about Marcus sitting somewhere, trying to rewrite the story in his head, trying to find excuses that no longer held weight. But I didn't linger there. That part wasn't mine. I had done my part. And now it was time to let go. The next morning, I went to the bank to close the account completely. The branch was quiet, tucked into a corner of a familiar shopping plaza. The teller smiled politely, no questions asked. I signed the final documents with steady hands. The account was gone, like a door closing softly behind me. Walking out, sunlight hit the pavement differently. Clearer, freer. I breathed in deeply. This was more than financial closure. It was emotional. A boundary set in ink and paper. A chapter finally complete. And as I drove home with the windows down, the wind threading through the quiet, I knew something had changed. I was no longer tied to the past. No longer carrying burdens that weren't mine to bear. I was standing on new ground, solid, unshakable, and entirely my own. Weeks passed after closing the account. Life settled into a rhythm that felt unfamiliar but welcome, steady, without the weight of old debts, spoken or unspoken. The folder lived now in the back of my filing cabinet, labeled simply Personal Archive. I didn't need it on my desk anymore. It wasn't a trophy. It was a record. A reminder of what happens when you stop shrinking to fit into a space that wasn't made for you. I found myself drawn more often to the balcony where the city stretched out beneath me. Glass towers, weaving streets, people moving with purpose. The city didn't care about family drama or debts. It only moved forward. I brewed tea one evening and sat out there, the air cool, scented faintly with rain. The world felt larger, possibilities wider. I thought about the woman I'd been at the start of it all, the quiet daughter, hoping for approval, willing to carry the weight in silence. She wasn't gone, but she had changed, hardened, learned. I didn't feel bitter. I felt sovereign. In a world that asks women to shrink, to tolerate, to overlook, I had chosen a different path. Not confrontation, but clarity. Not fury, but precision. The quiet strength that had simmered beneath my skin all those years had become a foundation, one I built myself, one no one could dismantle. Friends from the reunion called more often now. Invitations came for dinners, hiking trips, casual weekends. People who saw me for who I was, flaws, scars, and all. I realized belonging didn't have to come with a last name or a shared history. It could be created, chosen. One night, I flipped through a new notebook, its pages blank and waiting. The past wasn't erased. It was folded neatly behind me. Ahead was a story unwritten. I closed the notebook, a small smile tugging at my lips. The alerts on my phone still pinged softly sometimes, routine updates, balance checks, not out of suspicion but intention. A quiet reminder that vigilance is a gift, not a burden. Because I had learned the hard truth. Trust is precious, but boundaries are necessary. And I was no longer the one who carried the cost of forgetting. I was the one who remembered, fully, unapologetically, and on my own terms. The chapter was closed. The foundation was new, and the future, mine to build.